I was reading that Elon Musk has identified 6 engineers and he's brought them into Doge. And right now they're taking the axe to USAID, a US organization that takes $50 billion a year and gives it out globally. They put the names of these 6 kids out and they named them as government employees being brought in for this task by Elon, and they were all between the ages of 19 and 24. And Wired Magazine was intensely critical. What can these young kids teach us about government efficiency? Why do they have such a huge role in Treasury and USAID? What can they do? And I saw online people were intensely critical of these boys, young men. I had a chance to read.
Pay close attention to this video as to how much he struggles to call them men. They're so that he's going to sit here and make so many points about, how capable they are, but yet he himself struggles to recognize them as men, and they are men. Now, I'm going to critique this doctor's video, and one of the main themes is this guy is a doctor. He's speaking about matters that are outside of his area of expertise. He is a medical guy, right? Some of the issues he's discussing have to do with things like cybersecurity, national security. These are my areas of expertise. This is my domain, right? He is talking about things that he doesn't fully understand, and he's also violating principles of the scientific method. He's very smart. He's very capable. He knows better than this. He knows the way to think about things critically, to not end up saying the kind of things he's going to say in this video that I'm going to call out. But for some strange reason, he's unable to use the same skills he uses in medicine here, talking about things that are not his area of expertise. And by the way, the fact that this is not his area of expertise does not explain his violation of scientific principles.
Read about a couple of them, and here's what I learned. One, they say this kid is the savant in community. And I saw online people were intensely critical of these boys, young men. I had a chance to read about a couple of them, and here's what I learned. One, they say this kid is the savant in computer science. He went to UC Berkeley. His colleague says the night before the examination was due, he accidentally deleted pages and pages of code. And this guy just calmly sat there and said, well, I'll rewrite the whole thing from memory tonight. And he actually wrote it better than it was originally written. He's supposed to be a savant. So he says, as they say this kid is a, who says this kid is a savant, right? This guy is a doctor, right? And we actually work in sort of similar fields. In the work that I do, small mistakes can have massive consequences. I could make a small mistake at work that could literally lead to the collapse of a company. I can easily make the news by making very small mistakes. Small mistakes that within seconds causes catastrophe. In medicine, small mistake, patient dies. Small mistake, you've removed the wrong leg, right? So because of being in these types of fields that are very, very high skilled, high stakes, myself and this doctor both know that it's very critical to be detail oriented, right? So I don't know what he did. Like, did he verify this information? I don't know that. But what I do know is he's communicating to people about these types of things, and he's not even giving them sources or giving the details. Like, who's the they? The claim about, oh, he rewrote the code. How do we know that's even true? We're supposed to just take his word for it, right? He read somewhere that he did this and he did all this wonderful stuff, and he, in 5 seconds, rewrote, some new web engine or whatever, right? We're supposed to just take his word for it, right? Because this doctor is infallible, right? And we know him personally, so we know he would never tell a lie. He's Jesus. Someone with the kind of training that I have, and I know he has, would know, first of all, to verify these sources. And as a person who is operating in an educational perspective, and I believe he actually works at a university. And the reason I know that is because I didn't just watch this video and I'm going to comment on this. I wanted to know who this person is. I wanted to know what his expertise is. Is he even an actual doctor? Apparently he is. But I actually checked this kind of stuff before I got on here and just start saying stuff to people, right? He would claim that's exactly what he did. But once again, he doesn't share with us the details, right? So he could just be making this stuff up for all we know, right?
Savant. There's another kid who apparently there's some competition and they find some ancient scroll, I think some Phoenician scroll, some old ass scroll, and nobody knows what the writing on this scroll means. And there's a competition using this publicly available scroll data to see who can solve it using artificial intelligence and machine learning to try to figure out what the scroll means. And this kid is number one at figuring out what the scroll means using some very complicated computer algorithm. So these aren't.
How do we know that this is true? No sources, right? And also consider that people who are, they like Trump or they like Elon, they like what's happening with the government, they will just take his words without any skepticism at all. When I listen to liberals talking about whatever they're talking about, I'm skeptical. When I listen to conservatives talking about whatever they're talking about, I'm skeptical. I am an equal opportunity skeptic, right? I'm skeptical about this guy who claims he's a doctor. Apparently he is. I was skeptical. I had to confirm, right? So now I know he's actually a doctor, right? He's sitting here telling us stories about this guy did some scroll thing or whatever. I'm skeptical about these stories, these anecdotal stories. What are the sources? It would be helpful if he at least said, hey, I read an article in a certain magazine so we could go look it up ourselves. But instead, he just says a bunch of stuff, right? So he believes that he's talking to an audience that is not critical in their thinking, right? An audience that doesn't care whether this stuff is true or not, right? Because if he thought that they would think that, he would give the sources. He would give us some more details. He would at a minimum mention that he confirmed this information, right? When he tells the story, they said he supposedly did some savant thing, and I looked into it. It looks like it's actually true. So it looks like, he doesn't give any idea that he confirmed any of this stuff. He just read some stuff, right? I mean, how many people are out there? You have like a Ty Lopez who are out there existing on a lie. I think even the CEO of GoPro, right? He has this crazy story about how, he started from nothing, making stuff out of his van and whatever. And then you dig deeper and you start to see, wait a minute, this is not quite the way it's being presented, right? But the way this doctor is talking right now, he would go and just repeat the narrative that the CEO put out there, right? And of course, that narrative is going to be repeated by many people, right? GoPro is had some level of cult following. All right, so there are a lot of people who love the brand and they would just repeat back whatever the CEO said, just trust his words, right? So this doctor, not being skeptical, not being critical in his thinking, would just repeat the story. He started the thing out of his van. What do you know?
Just six ordinary kids, okay?
Sorry about that.
These aren't just six ordinary kids, okay? These aren't six ordinary young men. These are six extraordinary young men who are Elon's go-to engineers, who probably are the most capable computer science engineers. And I see media likes to criticize, what can they possibly tell us?
So the fact that they are extraordinary men is not relevant to the concerns, right? They could be the smartest engineers ever, right? They could be 10 times smarter than the smartest engineer that ever was. Would have no bearing on the concerns. The cybersecurity concerns, the not following protocol and potentially making mistakes concerns. Let me give you an analogy. You could have a pilot that is the best pilot ever, right? Exceptional pilot. I mean, the person has been flying since they were 10 years old, right? And then you put them in command of an aircraft. Let's say we're having a global event where we have to leave the planet. And this excellent pilot is going to fly this aircraft that's going to, there's basically, let's say, somehow we figured a way to put 200,000 people on an aircraft somehow, some magical way, right? And this guy is going to be flying this aircraft with, 200,000 lives in there, right? And he's hired by Elon, and they're just like sloppy, right? And you'd wonder why someone who's exceptional would be sloppy, right? Part of being exceptional would be the opposite of being sloppy. You'd be very methodical in how you do things. So you'd be a respecter of protocol and procedures and risk mitigation, right? But put that aside. So this is an exceptional pilot. And he is, normally you have people that fly this aircraft who have a lot of training on it, right? They're very familiar with this specific aircraft, very familiar with a lot of the things that are very specific to the way this aircraft operates and the mission that they're doing, right? And then you have this pilot who doesn't know anything about the aircraft, right? He's a really good pilot, exceptional pilot, but he doesn't have the domain expertise in terms of this specific aircraft and the mission that it's on. Don't really know that, right? And rather than consult with and collaborate with those that do know, right? So that this expert pilot can add to the mission, right? He decides, oh, I don't need anybody. I'm super smart. I'm a genius, right? So this pilot decides he's going to take off and he's not going to even follow a checklist, right? He's not going to file a flight plan, which is a normal procedure. He's not going to follow a checklist. He's just going to do it from memory or intuition, right? Exceptional pilot, but somehow behaving the opposite of exceptional, right? That's not something an exceptional person would do. And then because he's human, right? Misses a step. 1,000 feet off the ground, the aircraft flips inverted and comes straight down. 200,000 people are now dead because this exceptional pilot, he's exceptional, but why doesn't he follow protocol? He's exceptional. He doesn't need to follow the protocol. He's exceptional. Doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. Let's put it back to the specific scenario. Does being exceptional mean that we don't do background checks? Let's assume that they are exceptional. Is it not possible that an exceptional person could be a spy for a foreign country? I mean, spies tend to be exceptional people, right? Very highly skilled. Some of the best of the best. One of these kids could be an exceptional spy that we've let onto our government systems, right? An exceptional person could have a good heart, good intentions, be a real American patriot, yet have a family living in a hostile country, right? That hostile government finds out that people in their country have a child that is involved in accessing critical government systems. They kidnap the family. They get a message to the kid. Hey, I want you to put this USB drive in one of those computers. Real simple. Nobody's going to get hurt. You do that and your family will live. These are the kind of reasons why we have protocols like background checks. The fact that they're exceptional is not relevant to those types of risks, right? As this doctor knows, right? Let's go into his area of expertise and outside of my domain. But again, when you follow scientific method and critical thinking, right? Even though I would be careful about what I'm saying about medicine, I can still understand certain fundamental concepts. Like, for example, if you're going to go into surgery and you have this exceptional surgeon that you bring in from wherever, right? I know enough to know that you're supposed to, I think the term is scrub in or whatever, basically they clean their hands before they do surgery because they could contaminate. Again, outside of my expertise, but at least I think I have the general idea, right? This exceptional surgeon is known to be a germaphobe and a clean freak, right? Doesn't like to shake hands, that type of guy. So would this doctor be okay with that surgeon just coming into the operating room and not cleaning his hands? Just, he's an exceptional surgeon. He'll be fine, right? There's no chance that maybe something is on his hands that he's actually not aware of that could injure this patient. I mean, he's a genius. Geniuses don't make mistakes. Exceptional people don't make mistakes, right? Protocols and procedures, I'm sure, in a medical situation, apply to everyone, no matter your level of expertise. I'm pretty sure there's certain protocols and procedures that they follow in the hospitals that does not care your rank, your expertise, or your skill. Everybody follows these procedures. Now, this doctor might say, well, some of these procedures are silly, but I think he'd be arguing in bad faith.
About government efficiency. Well, here's the answer. Probably a lot. Actually, you probably can learn a lot from these extremely smart 6 kids. They probably can find inefficiencies that your bloated bureaucracy full of old people and old brains, including my old brain, can't figure out.
I like that he references his old brain. This is kind of a, I'm being objective. I'm not criticizing other people. I'm recognizing, hey, I'm old too. Right.
You see, I've learned more in my career from a smart young person than I've ever earned from somebody who's been doing the same job for too long without thinking creatively about it. It's often the youngest minds who are the freshest to the topic who have the most insights they can offer. And of course, what do computer scientists know about waste? I don't know.
And look at how he's just putting stuff, like random stuff out there. He says a young, smart kid could be better than someone who's been doing some job too long and not thinking creatively about it or whatever. So is he suggesting that it's not possible to have someone who's very experienced and doing something for a very long time and still goddamn creative? Right? Is he suggesting that once you get old, you just you lose all your creativity and people are all the same? I mean, just like how these kids, like someone could say, kids are lazy and they don't really take anything serious or whatever. And he would point out that these kids are the exception. They're not just like normal kids. Well, couldn't you also have someone who's very old, who's the exception, who been doing it a very long time, but still a pioneer, still an innovator, still super creative? I mean, why would one exist but not the other? Why would the one that exists be the one that supports his argument and the one that doesn't be the one that doesn't support his argument? Bias? Confirmation? Confirmation bias, perhaps?
They can do things that you can't think about doing. For instance, they could take every single document that's being processed in the federal government, and they could ask how many eyeballs look at this document using computer logs of how often the documents are accessed and looked at. And they can find which form numbers are the least looked at documents. Perhaps there are even some forms that are literally not looked at by anyone ever. If you find forms that are not looked at by anyone ever, that might be a great place to identify waste. Maybe we shouldn't make people produce those forms, and maybe we shouldn't collect those forms because ain't nobody looking at those forms. I don't know.
So this is a perfect example of how illogical this very smart person who is very capable of doing much better than this is. He gives this scenario about how they could figure out which documents are not being accessed. I don't think you need a computer engineer to do that, right? I think anyone that's, pretty good with Excel, could work something out, maybe Excel macros. There's other ways, right, to figure that stuff out. But regardless, look at the scenario that he presents and how illogical it is. So you're going to go and you're going to look for the documents that are the least used and think that these might be inefficient documents that we don't need. Nobody needs those, right? So what if one of those documents is a document that a state would fill out in the event that a nuclear bomb creates some level of damage in their state? A document like that would have never been used. So maybe we should get rid of it, right? Seems like
We don't need to have this document. It's waste, right? I mean, what about you have a car, right? We're going to do an efficiency analysis on a car, right? And through the, these genius programmers, just digging into the code and looking for inefficiencies, they recognize that there is this system, some kind of system that has some kind of compressor, like an air compressor of some sort. And the code says that when it's activated, it shoots a bunch of air through into this chamber. It's never been used. The car has 100,000 miles on it, and this system has never been used. Maybe we should remove it, right? No one wants this thing. It's not being used. It's never been used once, 100,000 miles. Maybe we don't need airbags. There are always going to be things that are used rarely, are needed rarely. The fact that it's not used a lot is not an indication that it's not necessary, right? I mean, that would come from the context of what is this thing and what is its purpose, right? But simply looking at something that's not being accessed a lot, I mean, that doesn't really mean much. And also, a form that isn't being used isn't an inefficiency because it's not being used. In order for it to be an inefficiency, it has to be used, right? An inefficiency, I mean, again, we're talking scientific, right? This guy should know better, right? If you have something that's not being utilized, how on earth can it be inefficient, right? When we talk about inefficiency, we're talking about like your output, right? An inefficiency in an engine restricts its output. How much power? How good is the acceleration, right? If you have something that's not being used at all, right, then it doesn't have any factor on efficiency or inefficiency. Now, technically, I could make an argument to where it does have an effect. You have 1 million forms, right, total. There's an audit system that runs on a regular basis, and it has to go through 1 million forms, including the ones that aren't being used. So that process is going to be sort of held back by the waste, right? So I could make those types of arguments, but generally speaking, this whole thing of finding a document that's not being used is kind of like, what? Let's continue.
No, these young people probably can do that shit. And you know what else they can do? They can probably look at complex processes where something is being permitted or granted or approved, and they can see which of the steps in this process is the slowest step, which is the rate limiting step for allowing this process. And they can identify that on a large scale, and we can say, hey, if we invest money in these bottleneck processes, we can actually improve efficiency, 10-fold, 100-fold.
Here's the problem with that. Without the domain expertise of the system, you are severely hindered. Now, I work a lot with programmers. And I'm going to tell you, for my field, you could be the best programmer ever. You are not going to be able to compete with the programmers that we would hire, the programmers that we have on staff. Because our programmers are not only experts in programming, they're also experts in our domain. Right? So imagine I'm an expert programmer. I'm going to make the hospital systems more efficient, but I don't know anything about medicine. I don't know anything about how hospitals run. That's going to give me a severe handicap. Now, you can work around that. You can, through collaboration, and that's another issue, right? Collaboration. You'd want to collaborate with people who do understand the domain, right? To advise you so you can learn and get up to speed, but that's a handicap. We bring on a programmer that knows the hospital, knows medicine. So he's a programmer that does medical work. That programmer is going to be much more efficient at figuring out the inefficiencies, because the one that doesn't have the domain expertise, he's like, this system is taking up a lot of resources. Let's get rid of it. Not understanding that system is essential, right? From a political standpoint, from a foreign relations. I mean, some of that stuff could be kind of complicated, The kind of thing that somebody at 21, 22, even if they did have some level of understanding of that, they haven't been around long enough to really understand the kind of stuff they're working with. So this is a scenario where there's a high probability of potential mistakes. And let's look at what the mistakes could be. If these guys are mucking around, and again, they're breaking all the rules, right? There's a reason why we have rules, right? Imagine, I mean, again, like I gave the scenario with the pilot, right? We're not perfect. We all make mistakes. And imagine a scenario where they mess something up and shut down an entire part of the system. I mean, it could be catastrophic, the kind of damage they could do. They were messing around with a $6 trillion payment system. $6 trillion. This is like the work that I do on steroids. I could make a mistake and shut down a company. These guys could make a mistake and shut down a country. When the stakes are that high and you're in there not following protocols, not following procedures, not respecting expertise, right? Yo, you're so smart. These kids are so smart. They know everything. And the thing about it is, I find it's interesting, is the way he's talking will be very appealing to some younger folks, right? Appealing to their arrogance, right? A lot of young people think they know everything, right? And to hear this guy say, no, don't let those old people tell you stuff. You guys are actually pretty... Listen, man, two things can be true. Yes, even in the hiring world, there is an attraction. And that's interesting because you wouldn't think it listening to what he says, but there's an attraction to getting young people, right? Because young people, very energetic, very passionate, potentially, not always, right? But that's where you can find a lot of energetic, passionate people. I mean, look at even me, which is very interesting. I am some version of these kids, right? I don't have this crazy story that I guess they have, but I mean, I'm the guy who won science fair 3 years in a row. I'm the guy who built the first website for a company I worked at right out of high school, right? This is a time where most companies didn't have websites. I went and I built it. I took the initiative and built it myself. I made that one little store become global in a couple of weeks by me just whipping up a website for them. So I had my accolades. I was always ahead of my time. I was the guy in sixth grade going to the back of the books, part of the books that we didn't even study. I was in high school taking a college level physics class for fun, right? So I know this kind of stuff. I know the idea of someone who's very young and smart and like really, really engaged. But the reality is, you would not have wanted me to be put in a situation like these kids, right? Your brain is still maturing at those ages. There's a reason why you can't rent cars under 25, I think, right? Your brain is still maturing. I know even me, who was definitely much more mature than people my age, I was still human, right? So me at 21, 22, I was doing some crazy stuff, man. Maybe not as crazy as some other kids my age, but I was doing some crazy stuff. My brain was still being formed. These kids' brains are still being formed. Who knows the reckless things that they might be doing? And then if they're not being watched, right? Congress doesn't know what they're doing. They're kind of operating in the dark, right? Not following procedures, not following protocols. This is a formula for disaster. And this is the kind of thing that even this doctor not having that expertise should be able to suss out. Just like how I don't know medical stuff, but I could figure what the scenario I gave, right? If anyone has any medical experience, tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, I would assume logically, you got to wash your hands before you go into surgery, right? Even for someone who's a germaphobe, I assume people aren't going to be like, he's a germaphobe, he's fine. I'm pretty sure those rules are zero tolerance. Everybody must wash their hands before they go into surgery, right? Protocols are put there for a reason, right? For all the negative, we want to focus on the negative things about the government. I mean, these systems have been kept up and running for a very long time, right? With few major outages. They have a pretty good uptime, I would say, right? So they're doing something right. And part of that comes from procedures and protocol. I know when you're young, which is interesting because I think he's speaking to a younger audience. Like this would appeal to them.
when you're young, you don't respect procedures, right? You just want to do it your way. We don't need to do that, right? And then you have to learn the hard way, right? Dying in a car accident because you were driving drunk because you figured, I'm fine. I'll be fine. I know my limits, right? Parents trying to tell you better, but you think you know better. That's who this guy's talking to. Is it intentional? I don't know, but I know that will be the effect. Younger kids who think they know it all, loving to hear, here's a smart person agreeing that you guys, you're smart. Don't let the old people tell you what to do. The old people definitely have a lot of problems, for sure. But to completely discount experience and wisdom is foolish.
Here's the thing that I observed with this doctor. He definitely seems to be a victim of Trump derangement syndrome. And it's very interesting because what I've found is that the people who usually talk about other people having Trump derangement syndrome is actually them. The people who are the most deranged by this cult of personality that's called Donald Trump. It's the Trump fans, right? But like with many things we hear coming from right-wing media, it's not completely based on lies. There is some level of basis to the claim. There is something that you could refer to as Trump derangement syndrome that is exhibited on the left, in particular with liberals. And that is the Trump bad syndrome. Anything Trump does must be bad. Anything Trump says must be bad. This doctor will make that exact same point that I just made. The difference is that I recognize that usually they happen to be right. And it's not based on their critical thinking or how smart they are. It's just, that's how bad Trump is, that usually when liberals are complaining about Trump, it's legitimate. They might exaggerate. They might be hyperbolic sometimes. A lot of that's coming from the media, who their business is sensationalism. But the reality is that a lot of things they say are much more close to reality than a lot of things you hear coming from right-wing media. So while there is a knee-jerk Trump bad reaction from liberals, again, they happen to be right a lot of times. That's mostly coincidental, but still, it is what it is. However, the people who are always talking about other people have Trump derangement syndrome, they're usually wrong about a lot of different things. Case in point, this doctor likes to talk about Trump derangement syndrome, and then he makes a video like this, which completely defies the scientific method, defies his intelligence level, defies his training. I mean, he knows better, right? But that's the derangement. How smart you are and how capable you are becomes less relevant when you get caught up in this cult of personality. One thing you will notice about him, he gives a really good veneer of kind of like, I'm objective and I'm nonpartisan or whatever. But I urge you to go and try to find any video from him that has the level of passion, for the lack of a better word, that's not the word I wanted to use, critiquing Trump, critiquing conservatives, critiquing anything crazy. Like, out of all the things we've seen coming from the right and ridiculous things that have been said, just doesn't seem to really care about that. But whenever he views the establishment to be, hysterical or wrong about something, or, liberals to be wrong about something, or they're criticizing Trump about something, and, that's the stuff he's like, oh, it's almost like he has this confirmation bias. He's recognized that there are some incorrect things that have been said by the establishment and by the liberals, and it's bothered him to some degree, and put him into this derangement to where he's preoccupied with calling out the establishment and the so-called experts and the bureaucracy or whatever it is, right? I see the same thing with even breaking points, right? So focused on this, mainstream media bad stuff that they don't see the stuff that they're doing that's just like the mainstream media that they critique, right? I see a lot of time focusing on critiquing mainstream media, not so much on independent media. That's changing now, but independent media, they keep talking about how it's the new thing and no one's watching legacy media anymore. But yet they spend so much time talking about and attacking the mainstream media and not the independent media folks who are doing far worse than mainstream media could ever do. I mean, there's so many really bad actors in independent media right now, right? But again, so focused on one thing. I actually come up with a term to describe this mentality, because this is something that I've noticed fundamentally with Americans with politics. They get so frustrated with one thing that they just get preoccupied with it. There might be a term that describes it already. If you guys know it, let me know. But so frustrated with one thing that you get so preoccupied with it that you turn your back to everything else, right? So I'm on one side. One day I recognize that there's some issues on this side and it really bothers me. So I go running to another side. But when I'm on that side, I have my back turned to the side I'm on, right? So I'm standing in a tribe on the boundary. My back is facing the tribe. So the tribe is doing all kind of craziness, lies, misinformation, whatever. I don't see any of that because my whole focus is on the tribe that I left and how ridiculous they are and how extreme they are and how they are cancel culture, whatever it is. They're too woke, right? You'll see a lot of centrists, so-called centrists. This is what happens to them. They find one little thing, it's like a chip on their shoulder, and they just cannot escape from this focusing on where they left from, right? I think this is the Trump derangement syndrome that is apparent in this doctor seems to be of that variety. That would be my estimate, right? Again, it's COVID is what messed a lot of people's brains up, man. And he would tell you the same thing, right? But something happened in COVID, and I saw it. There's a lot of crazy stuff. The way they treated the lab leak theory, right? So he probably saw stuff like that, and he's like, oh goodness. And he's seeing, an institutional sort of betrayal of like they like to mock following the science, right? And things getting political, right? And then that bothered him so much that he just got preoccupied with it, that he has his back turned to a lot of things that are far worse. That he's here sitting, making a video literally defending Donald Trump, who is putting his country at severe danger. Mainstream media loves to sensationalize and exaggerate. That is not what I'm doing. Extreme danger is, I'm only using that word because that's the most extreme word I can think of. But I don't even think that word is appropriate. I think I need to use a word that's even more extreme than that, right? Trump Derangement Syndrome is a thing. And the ones who are infected by it the most are the ones who love talking about it the most. Strange.
This is the Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.